Welcome once again for one more interesting episode of Celeb Talk 1.0. And we have got a very special personality, our special guest, Mr. Ron Thomas. Let's welcome Mr. Ron Thomas for this exclusive episode of Celeb Talk 1.0. Welcome, Mr. Ron Thomas.
How are you?
So
Glad to be here.
I'm really excited. I have been following a personality who has been a thought leader, who has been really a globetrotter. So we are going to talk the talk, or I should say, talk to the person who has been walking the globe. So walk the globe with a personality who has been crisscrossing with his maverick personality and the leadership. A person who started with HR training. He has been heading some of the top brands like Xerox, who has moved to the different parts of the world in different roles, whether it has been as a CHRO, whether it's as a CEO. He is now a personality whom people follow, a mentor, a real strategist, educationist, and a person who has been a thought leader, as I say. So we really are glad that he has been able to give some time out of his busy schedule to share with our audience today in this wonderful podcast journey. So once again, I really welcome in our Indian style by saying namaste to Mr. Ron Thomas.
Thank you
So,
for having me as a guest.
so, sir, we always try through this effort of our PMA that how we can really shed the positivity in people and how leaders like you, characters like you who really have seen the life, who have seen this world so far, how we can really use the wisdom, your knowledge, and we can really change people. And those leadership can be brought into people's daily day-to-day use. So how do you see your journey is really going to help thousands of people who might be watching this podcast and who would be really trying to understand that how exactly one day we can also fulfill a dream like Mr. Ron Thomas. So we were really interested to know that who is this gentleman Ron Thomas and how exactly we can be like him.
Well, you know what? If you think back to university, when you come out to university, you have this perception as if I'm going to go here, 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 and it's all linear. Anyone that's listening that's in school now and you're coming out, graduating, or you're just on your first or second job, forget about it. It doesn't work that way. I mean, you can stay in a job for 20 years, and for the most part, that will never happen again. So you have to always stay on the lookout for opportunities. And I've always kind of worked by the premise that you're always looking for next. Because if you look at people's careers, and on my show, the CEO series, we interview leaders that are CEOs or could be a doctor, but they're no longer doing that. I know more doctors that are not doctoring. I know more lawyers that are not lawyering. And people start out on a journey, and the journey has a detour. The journey has a right turn, left turn, a U-turn to start over again. Failures, success, small success, turning it around. So it's kind of like playing a strategic puzzle with your career, but you always want to try and explore. Never get comfortable just sitting in that one spot and thinking this is the ultimate for me, and I'm going to do this for X amount of time. That's not going to happen. Specifically for people that's coming out now. I've been seriously following the layoffs in the tech industry, Intel, Microsoft, and the key impetus behind those about because of AI and chat GPT and all those kinds of things. So companies are realizing the skills are not there for the people I have, and I have to go out and find the skills. Learning and development has to build the skills. But I say, what about the people in those roles? Did they foresee that this was coming? So the other key point I want to mention to you is that the concept of continuous learning. You have to stay in the space of your industry to see what's out there. If you're venturing into something else, it's a continuous job to learn the innovations that's coming down the pike, the detours that's going to cause someone to start from, basically, in a lot of cases, starting all over again. So those would be my two key things in looking at that. Always stay interested and continuous learn, because the journey that you thought is not going to happen for the most part.
Absolutely. And I'm so much impressed with your answer. And that's, I think, the key learning for this generation for us to understand that how really you can adapt yourself in the most difficult times. So when we are actually amidst a lot of disruption, a lot of new things happening around, even at times we are not really prepared for that. What do you think is the kind of leadership is really going to help us in our daily existence?
Well, I think leaders inside of organizations should become closer to their workforce and have these kind of discussions as to where it's headed. I always admire Netflix. Netflix at the end of every earnings call, they have an earnings call, all hands meeting for all the employees. They talk through the financials, they talk through the bright spots, they talk through the spots that's not so great. But at the end of that, they said if you have ideas, bring them to us and we try and figure it out. That's from the corporate side. But from the worker side, your job now in this climate is to learn everything you can learn concerning your industry, if that's where you're going to stay, because the next 15, 20 years is not promised. And you're going to have to take that on your own. You're going to have to become what I call the CEO of you. Current state, future state. How am I going to get to this side? What bridge am I going to build to get to the other side? That's the key.
Amazing. So I really picked that particular concept, the CEO, being the CEO of yourself, being the CEO of your concepts. So how exactly do you see this present environment or this kind of evolving landscape? If I take example of Dubai or any other, the developed country, how actually people fit into that culture and how they really could adapt with that competition? And somewhere do you see that when we talk about being a leader who is ready for the change or be the change leader in yourself, we are really having that kind of maybe the climate or the socio economy or the socio culture, which really is going to help in becoming that kind of person? Or it's kind of a compulsion, which is really forcing people to adapt to that style? So,
Well, that would take another 2 hours to go through all of that. Let me just pick out the key points that you mentioned. I talked about the leader's role. The new leader's role is becoming close to your workers and having these discussions. But I go back to the CEO of the brand. If you think of the way the strategy is created, I'm here, and in 5 years I want to be here. So if that's the case, what steps do you need to make to get to the other side? And that has to be on your mind 24/7. And the days of just sitting back, things are going to be cool, and the company is going to take care of me and all those things. Get out of the mindset, because that's not going to happen. I mean, in a lot of cases it might, but the vast majority of people in careers now, in the next 5 or 10 years, if you stay in that job, the job is totally different. If you don't, if you're in that job, you're possibly going to be laid off because of reskilling and upskilling or whatever you want to call it.
mhm,
You don't have the skills for the new workforce. The same as I
mhm,
mentioned, Intel and Microsoft realized that the chips that were being designed was the chips that no one wanted because it did not have the artificial intelligence piece built into that.
mhm,
So I can take that and make it back and look at my career. I'm a chip designer, whatever it is, and I've been designing chips, but I didn't follow the industry for the most part. I could be wrong, but I'm making an assumption. I didn't follow the industry. So what happened with that is that the company was moving towards future state, which meant a different skill set. And when they realized we got to come back and impact 15,000 employees, and that 15,000 employees could have been you. But if I would have followed it the same way that the strategy people in my organization was following it, I could have realized that maybe there was another class I could take. I could watch more webinars. I could get more cognizant of what of this future state of chip design is. And I can build my own strategy as to how am I going to get to the next level, and maybe search for a job that's more aligned with that versus what I'm doing.
sure.
I just had a conversation. I'll give you an example of this. A gentleman's going to come on my show. He's a doctor. He's was a heart transplant surgeon, but he wanted to get away from that. He wanted to get away from that in a way to talk about people's careers and how it changed. He said, I didn't want to do that anymore. He said, I wasn't happy doing that, but I was happy talking to people about their careers, about how they were going to look in the so-called next life in the next 3 to 5 years. And even as you introduce himself to him, he'll call himself David. He will not say Dr. David. He said, because that was in a past life. And I was doing that. So I know a lot of people, lawyer friends of mine, they're no longer doing that because the career dynamic today cannot work on the same model that it worked 15 years ago. If your father was a doctor, he stayed a doctor until he retired. A lot of the younger doctors, they're not doing that anymore, as well as lawyers. Everybody kind of has, not everybody, but they have this kind of entrepreneurial thing. I want to try something. And I said, fine, try it. You know, you're not going to know until you try. You may fail. That's okay, fine. You get back up and you try something again.
I think that's a very big thing which you really have pointed, because these days I could see that people out of the university, they have their dreams in their eye, but unfortunately they are not chasing their dreams. They're doing something else. And that is perhaps we could see a lot of failures. That is where we find a lot of disappointment.
We find a lot of disappointments. And I know a friend of mine, an Indian friend of mine, told me, he said, when you're growing up and you go to school, you leave the house, you go to university, engineer, doctor, and what was the other one? I forget the other. And this is what the parents push you to.
Oh, yes.
A young lady worked for me, and she was an accountant. Then she became a CPA. And we were talking one day. I said, why did you choose accounting out of high school? She said, because my father was an accountant. My uncles were accountants. And they said, always become an accountant because you'll always have a job. And she said, once I graduated, I got my CPA, and I worked 1 year in accounting, and I realized I cannot do this for the rest of my life. So she started a business based on the detour. And the detour was, how do you figure out what's next if this career is not for me? And this is what she started from. And we had this conversation so many times. And the more I think about her, think about how many other kids that are engineers and they hate every minute of it. You know, they could be doctors and they realize I can't do this for the next umpteen years or whatever it is. So I always tell people, explore, try something new, never get settled in one spot and assume I'm going to do this for the next period of time, because it's not going to happen.
I think that is where we call as getting the true ikigai, as that Japanese concept. So how your profession, passion, the purpose, how it brings you together in one convergence. So how do you really see that what exactly is really required for today's parents? I'm sure like our days were yesteryear old when our parents really didn't even bother that in which direction you go. But today's parents, oh my goodness, they're really looking into every aspect. So what exactly would be your message for the parents who are really going to set everything for their future generation?
Back off and let your kids try and fail. When I was at Martha Stewart, I created a program. We adopted a high school. And because our vast majority of job families were designers, very creative people that could design a cup, saucer, and all those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. I was looking around to see whether I had one here on my desk. And I realized it was a different mindset because I'm like, wow, they're totally different in the way they think and all these kinds of things. So we adopted a high school, and our chief design officer gave us for the first year. And it was all these kids in there, basically for the most part, lower income to middle income kids, because it was a New York City school. And one of the mothers came up to me after the speech and everything, and she said, I cannot thank you enough for doing what you did. And I'm okay, what? She said, my son has been telling me that he wants to be a designer. He's very creative and he draws and all these things. But she says, I've been telling him, you go to school for a teacher, because this way you'll have a job for the rest of your life. And she said, I was convinced when you folks were telling this story, I'm going to let him make the choice and let him go to design school. But think of how many others that parents did not see the light and they were still trying to play what we call in U.S. helicopter parents. They're hoovering over their kids, and the kids trying to point things out. Leave it. Let your kid choose. The kid may choose, go to college, go to university and realize this is not for me, but let them make the choice. But you try and instill in them, explore life. The decision you make today probably will not carry you for the next 50 years. And I think once we get back to, I don't know once we get back to that, but we have to move away from the old concept that here's what you should do. You go 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3 doesn't work anymore. In any logical order, it may be 1, 25, 32, 10, and it keeps going back.
Absolutely. I think this is an absolute takeaway from this particular, message which you have given, that we should back off. And do you see that same trend is also being followed, that when these individuals tomorrow transform into a social leaders, whether it's in our corporate boardroom, and the same persona is there, that being very protective, being possessive with their team, and sometimes it end up doing micromanagement.
Yeah, I had an interesting discussion with my daughter the other week, and she told me, she said, since I've been out of university, maybe 4 to 5 jobs, she said, I've never had a job that I really, really enjoyed. I've never had a boss that I really, really liked. Well, one boss that she really liked, and she says, I kind of started off on the wrong foot. I said, no, you didn't. You didn't start off on the wrong foot. But all of those are learning. So once you become a boss, a so-called boss, you will know how to treat people. And I think I read a white paper, and the white paper said, as the leaders that are going through a lot now, workers that are going through a lot now, as they become leaders of the future, you'll find a lot of these arcane ways of thinking about people, of thinking about work process, writing you up. Those things are going to change because the mindset of the new leader, and I'm talking the demographic, is going to be totally different than someone, well, I've been here for 32 years and this is the way we've always done that. That's gone.
Absolutely.
And I think the quicker that an organization can realize that, the better off they're going to be. Because all this foolishness, I think with CEOs basically all the time. And sometimes the mindset is so rigid. But when you look at the DNA of a board, you look at the DNA of a C-suite, they all came up in a different era. In the U.S., they're struggling with work from home. Well, we need everybody back into the office 3 days a week. So why is it 3 days? Could it be 1 day? Could it be 2 days? Why are you? The vast majority of those concerns about coming back into the office is based on real estate and finances. We have 5 floors on Madison Avenue. It's costing us $20 million on this contract. We don't need that anymore. And you walk through there, and there's 3 people inside of the building. And they're having a tough time letting that go. But eventually what's going to happen, you're going to have to offer flexibility for workers. Now, I know in the UAE here, we're saying, well, 3 days a week, and we'll give you 2 days a week. But the companies that excel at this, they let the employees make the choice. So if I'm in finance, I know that at the end of the month, everybody needs to be in because we need to close the book for the month. But for the most part, the first 3 weeks of the month, let the team decide how they want to work. I'm offering flexibility. So I say that to say in closing is that you have to offer workers choices. Because if I'm rigid and say, oh, my finance team has to be in 5 days a week. Well, you know what? There's somebody out here knocking on my window and say, come over here. You have flexibility. You can choose the day you want to work. You tell me which one they're going to make the choice for.
Absolutely. So I just want to come here saying one thing. Like, as you said, that we should have choices for our people. But in many cases, people don't know that even there's something called a choice. And, they're really being followed by the train, and they just go by what others do. And there are, the so-called, the role models who basically said that, no, this is how the society moves, and we should be doing that. Okay, this is something the Western countries are doing. This is something which we do. And typically, I'm sorry to say in this podcast, but I've seen that the people who always try to become very adaptive and resilient, they are the more who get exploited. And when they're getting exploited, they don't know they're getting really exploited.
But someday they will realize that and make a choice. I just read an interesting article on the new CEO for Starbucks. He lives in a different part of the US. He's going to commute by private jet into the office on the days he needs to be there. Now, meanwhile, Starbucks has this foundation that everybody needs to be into work or 2 days a week, 3 days, whatever. He's not going to even abide by that. He's going to fly into work on a private jet, and he's going to work out of his home. They're going to build him an office in his home for the days he can work there. Now, what does that mean for me if I'm working in a company and they're rigid about me coming in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? But here's the CEO. He says, I'll come in when I want to come in, and I'll go to the airport and I'll jump on a private jet. And you fly me in. At the end of the day, I fly back home. And I'm thinking, you're talking about sending the wrong message. That comes back to a culture in an organization. Because I'm sure the people inside of Starbucks corporate are saying, how can this happen? And the first year he's making, like, they did a calculation the other day. His hourly rate is $45,000 per hour. I don't know whether that includes the private jet or not. But I say to CEOs, you have to walk the talk. If you're saying certain things, live that. Because the culture is dependent on you. The culture is dependent from here. But I see so many times of examples like that, and I'm thinking, what were you thinking? Oh, I can just commute by. I would love to be able to drive out to, chauffeur it out to Dubai airport, and I have to work in Singapore, and every day I fly to Singapore and I fly home at night. I would love to be able to do that. It's unreal. But so I'm going to end that by saying, for leaders, you're going to have to offer flexibility. And whatever you're asking your workers to do, you have to exemplify that. You have to set the standard because they're watching all of that. And when I read through the contract, I'm thinking, I could just imagine what the workers are talking about over lunch. The workers are talking about, maybe they had a disagreement with their boss, and the boss says, well, I need you here for this. Mm-hmm. We can only do this. And maybe I requested, because maybe my mother-in-law moved in with me, or my child is sick. Can I work from home 3? We don't do that because the rules are here. And here's some guy coming in, and they're going to fly him in by private jet. It's called tone deaf.
Absolutely.
And it's high in the 20 to 30. And the older person gets, the less they're going to leave a job. So that tells you right there, you don't need to go to school to get a PhD to figure that one out. And what that means is that you're going to have high turnover here. And if they stay, they could be not skilled in what's happening. So the skill is coming in from that data set. I have to make sure they're developed, and I have to make sure they're engaged. And I heard one CEO tell me, he said, I don't care. I'll just find somebody to do it cheaper. I said, you keep thinking that. I said, because the numbers will show you that these younger people, they're not going to stay, and they're not going to take it. And eventually you're going to be looking for talent. So when you think of turnover, and you had, say, 100 people leave last year, how many of those people were super, super talented that took their skills someplace else? You'll always have some that you said, well, I'm glad they left because they weren't bringing any value to the organization. But you're going to have to look at it through the lens of how much talent out of that turnover data am I losing? I can flip that and say, pull up the performance chart. If I have a 4-point rating system, and the vast majority of people are leaving out of the 4 category, which is our top tier, or the 3 to 4, 3 is average, 4 is top, you're draining talent. And if the 1s and 2s are growing while the 3s and 4s are being diminished, long-term effect is going to be impactful.
So this really is definitely very alarming. And I'm sure like the leaders across the globe, they are really thinking about it. And even not they're thinking.
Some of them are, and some of them are.
So I could really, this resonates with me even. So I see a lot of, the hippos who basically are really having the prospect. How we retain these hippos? And when we talk about this, hippos are really performing well, not being engaged. How do you see that syndrome really? Even most of the leaders don't even realize it in the first place when the crisis is.
Until that pendulum changes, and you get more people on the other side to start running these organizations, running departments, divisions, that's when it'll change. That's when the culture of the organization change. This is how we do it here. We're a very empathetic culture. You know, we listen to our workers. And I heard one young lady tell me, she said that her mother was aging and they had to move the mother into the house. And what happened was that the boss was still putting all this work on her, knowing that she had an extra duty. Her work started falling down, the quality of work started falling down. And his concept was to write her up. And I'm like, wow. So you're taking care of a senior citizen in your home that you didn't plan for. And you're stressed out at work and you're ready to write her up. And she broke down in tears. So my thought was, if I'm the head of that department, I should have known that. You should have come to me and said, there's some changes that's coming through. Or do they feel comfortable telling me that? There's some changes coming through and I'm going to have to move my mother, father, whatever it is in. And my thought as a leader, so, well, you know what? Let me know how I can help. Is there anything you can do? Do you need a couple of days to work from home to do what you need to do? We are here to help each other. And I want you to be successful. And I want you to continue doing what you're doing, but you guide me as to how you want to work. Perfect solution. Absolutely. Versus the other one says, you know, your quality of work is coming down and, you know, we've got some complaints and, you know, if this continues, I'm going to write you up and I'm going to do a PIP of what performance improvement program.
So
sometimes I go like this. What are you thinking?
What you are thinking, absolutely. So as we are just coming to the end of this podcast, and now since we have to ask you for the final 3 takeaways for our audience, that what exactly do you think are the easy, simple, but some solid state action which they can do to become the future leaders, or already they are leaders, but they just want to be more effective as a leader? What are the 3 takeaways you'd like to share with my audience?
I'm struggling because of the 3. First thing is become the CEO of you. You're in charge. There's no need to complain if you don't do anything about it. Companies spend a lot of time on developing strategy. They said, we're here, but we want to be the market leader here. Whatever the skill set is, you're going to have to build a bridge across to get to the other side. For leaders, become more empathetic. These are people that you're dealing with, and everyone is going through something. If I've got 10 people in the room I'm talking to, each one of those 10 has different things that they're thinking about. Do I know what they are? Will they feel comfortable coming in, just close the door and say, can we just talk and have a conversation? And you're there listening, and you want advice for them. How do you want me to proceed? Do you want me to help, or do you want just a sounding board in doing that? And my next level of that is top of the food chain, the C-suite. Things are going to have to change in order for you to. It's about the employee experience now. You have to create an experience inside of your organization where people want to work there. They want to be successful there. They want to help this company succeed. Why? Because this company takes care of me.
Absolutely. And I'm sure like these takeaways are really going to the golden takeaways for our audience. And we would really love to learn more, but again, time is really coming to an end. So every good thing comes to an end. So, but we really look forward to have you once again in our show, provided you are available and you are kind enough to support us in the similar way as you have been. I really thank you from the core of my heart and from my team on behalf of Positive Mental Attitude. And I'm sure this evening has been wonderful, sharing wonderful nuggets from you, sir. So we wish you all the best for your success journey. Continue the good which you are doing for the society, for the mankind in the similar way. Spread the message of leadership and positivity. Here, Dr. Das, I sign off from this show and see you back once again for such a lovely podcast with Ron Thomas.